Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to the Medical Student Education Committee Forum. We are so excited to have you. And I'm loving the energy here. You all are so excited to be here and you're networking already. I just want to give you a quick overview. We are going to do basically an hour where we have this panel of experts that I'm going to introduce. They're going to tell you all of their wisdom so that you're so successful at matching. And then we're going to have the mingle. And if you see in the background, we've got tables with topics and we have some of our faculty here. So we have additional faculty so we can answer every question you could possibly think of. And I usually do say whenever someone comes to my office, I say Vegas rules apply, but here really Vegas rules apply. You can ask anything you want. There's zero judgment. We're not saving any of your questions or using it against you. This is a space to help you be as successful as you possibly can. So welcome, and we're gonna get started with our first hour. We may go a little bit further if we get some lively conversation, but you're gonna have plenty of time, and we're gonna want you to rotate through the tables when the mingle starts. So we're gonna introduce this amazing panel. I am your moderator, Marissa Clifton. I am a CMO of Johns Hopkins Bayview and a recovering program director. So I very much love our residents, but my heart is actually with our medical students, and I see some of my mentees in the audience, and I'm thrilled to have you. So I'm going to introduce our panel. We have Dr. Erica Traxel. She is a very close friend, an amazing person, and a pediatric urologist, and she works as an associate professor at WashU, and she's also the treasurer of the SAU. So she's going to be able to give us a lot of insights for the match this year, so I expect her questions to be very, very many. Then we have Dr. Kathleen Kieran. She is also one of my close friends, an amazing pediatric urologist and the fellowship director. She is so engaged in medical education, and it's been a privilege to learn from her. We have Dr. Jen Yates as well. She's at UMass, and she is an associate professor as well as a program director. And she, again, has tons of wisdom. She's also an oncologist, so much smarter than I am, and we're thrilled to have her. Dr. Matthew Ziegelman is a very close friend of mine. He's also my junior resident, so he can only be nice to me. He works at the Mayo Clinic and is an associate professor and an expert in sexual health, and we're so glad to have him. He's also very involved with our medical students through the Mayo Clinic. And then we're very lucky to have student Dr. Daniela Rendon, who is joining us from Dartmouth, and I believe she has matched and she's going to UCSF, so a very successful match. And so she may actually be able to give you the most insight, so look forward to connecting with her. So I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the wonderful programming and options we have for our medical students. Please become an AUA member. Every medical student could join for free. That means you get all of our online content, so not just the medical student education curriculum. You can get the core curriculum. You have access to everything. And don't forget, it's an amazing resource, and this committee and other committees spend a lot of time curating that content for you. So make sure to join. You can access the medical student education curriculum, and this is actually free to everyone. So if you have medical students that don't want to become AUA members, which I don't understand why they wouldn't, but you can give them this resource, and we cover some very important topics for all medical students. I actually give this to some of my colleagues in infectious diseases and internal medicine because I think the content is so good. So I think it's a great resource. Make sure you know about it. We also have a medical student playlist that's on YouTube, and we have had so many amazing webinars. So if there's content that you want to delve into, we likely have a webinar that's kind of been focused on that. Most recently, we did a wellness webinar with some of our experts. Really a great, I think, tool and a lot of utility for people that are not even medical students, but faculty and even senior faculty. Okay. So we're going to get started with some questions. Again, these are pre-programmed, but we look forward to answering more questions in our breakout session. Okay, is everyone with me? Everyone excited? Yes. See, this is why we love medical students. Okay, so this is a very common question that we get asked, and I think it's very appropriate for some of you that are getting more senior in medical school. And I'm going to start with Dr. Kieran. How do I get the most out of my fourth-year clinical rotation in urology and beyond?
Okay, so I have strong feelings on this. So I think that when you have a clinical rotation, you need to think about what you are doing to showcase your skills and your potential as a future member of the field to everyone you meet. And I'll come back to that in a second. But also, I think it is important, and sometimes as students you forget that you are supposed to be there learning and making sure that that rotation is meeting your learning needs. So there's sort of two ways that I think you have to approach it, and I do think you need to do both. The first is be extremely professional. And I know the term professionalism is loaded, but remember that comportment is really something that people remember. People remember if you are late. People remember if you are not dressed appropriately for clinic, whatever that might be. People remember if you do a sloppy job with your notes. People remember if you are rude to patients. People remember if you are incomplete. The second part of that is medical knowledge. As a medical student, I don't think anybody has truly high expectations that you will know things, but if you can know the nuances of why is this patient right here, right now, getting this clinic visit or getting this procedure, that will go a long way. Knowing key parts of the procedure also really helps. And then I think it goes without saying, I said, be kind to everyone, but especially if you're at an away rotation, but also if you're at your home institution, everything is an interview. And I'll tell you, personally, I have patients who are unkind to my nurses or to my schedulers, or to the medical assistants, anybody, and we know, and that does not take you far. So you treat everyone with kindness, be respectful of everyone, not just because you want to match or do well, but because you want to be a good human being. The other part of it is in terms of getting something for yourself. I would talk to as many people as possible. What do they like about the rotation? What do they not? What do they like about the department? And I think this is about, is it a good place for you to train? What are you looking for? What are the important things that will help you in your future career so that you can make a good judgment when you go to the match, even if you don't go to that particular program?
Excellent answer. Anyone else want to add from the panel?
I think it's, I second all of the comments from Dr. Kieran, and I think if you have a question, how should I dress? What is professionalism? What would be appropriate? Every institution has a different culture. Expectations are a little bit different as far as what should you wear to clinic, when should you show up. Ask the residents, they're your best asset. So if you're, rather than trying to soldier through this yourself and figure out exactly what's expected of you, they're used to doing this. This is what they love. Many of them really enjoy medical student teaching, and they're your best asset for these questions and kind of what's expected. We had a student not so long ago, just to give you a little anecdote on service, and our residents always prep our medical students. And I said to one of the residents, I said, oh my gosh, she was amazing. She was helping the nurse, she was doing this, she had prepared for this, and our resident said, I know, I prepped her for this. So the residents really are there. Many of them want to help you and move your career forward and recruit you to our field. So utilize them if there's any question on your fourth year rotation of how, what, when, and appropriateness. And I would also second the comment that everything is an interview. There's a little bit of a difference between your own sub-I at home and then when you go do an away rotation, and I think this is critical. Your home institution is there to mentor you and to help you become a better medical student and a better physician. When you go to sub-Is, there's a little bit of a less emphasis on that and more of kind of that interview flair. So keep that in mind. The time to really kind of get your all of your questions answered and your routine down of being a fourth year medical student is before your away sub-Is. It's when you're home with us. We are there to help you.
Great advice. And I do think, just to echo, every resident and faculty wants you to be successful. No one's trying to trip you up, and if you have humble inquiry, people really want to engage. So let's move to our next question. Dr. Ziegelman, how many sub-internship experiences should I pursue?
It's a great question. I think there's a lot of variables that play in here. So some of this depends on what you're trying to get out of your sub-I. Are you trying to explore programs that you're really interested in? Are you trying to get more exposure to urology if you don't have a home program? How competitive do you think you are as a candidate? And some of that is based on your discussion with your mentorship. So I mean, I think, I don't know what the average number is these days, but I think doing your home sub-I and then anywhere from 1 to 3, depending on those specific variables. I'm not sure if anybody gives their students, I think it's very individualized counseling from your mentors about your competitiveness and what you're trying to get out of a rotation that factors into it. And also how much time your school allows you to be away.
That is an excellent point, and it is really important to reach out to your faculty and say, hey, we need to have a very honest conversation. You want to know. So you have to sometimes bring that up to your either the program director, the clerkship director, or your mentors that are in the department, and they can give you some very good advice if you open up the door to that conversation. But you have to be willing to accept the feedback to understand their lens, where they're coming from. So Dr. Traxel's there. I'd like you to kind of maybe answer just a little bit more and then follow up the question, what if my medical school does not have a residency program, and how do I optimize my application?
Yeah, I can add a little bit in terms of numbers around kind of what is the current state of people doing visiting sub-internships. So just to put in a plug, the SAU very deliberately creates a survey for each match season, one survey that goes to applicants and one that goes to program directors, because I think it's actually very important for us to have information like across the range, like how many visiting rotations are people doing. So just to put in a plug right now, whenever you are submitting your rank list, you will afterwards be asked, would you please complete this survey? And so obviously that takes your time, but I think it's very helpful to inform future people going through the application process. So with regards to this most recent match season, how many people or how many visiting rotations were people doing? It's actually, I think, trending where people are doing more and more visiting rotations, which is a whole other conversation about the merits of that, the cost associated with that, but what the numbers were. So over 95% of applicants did an away rotation. About 5% did one visiting rotation. 30% did 2 visiting rotations. 37% did 3 visiting rotations. 19% did 4, and there were like 5% of people who did more than 4. And I'm like, who's got time and money for that, right? Not to mention, depending upon your home institution and school, what your curricular requirements are. Like, you might not be able to do that many, but just letting you know, there is a trend. People are doing more and more visiting rotations. I would also add, in terms of considerations for the visiting rotations that you may or may not do, also taking into account your personal set of circumstances. So many people will leverage visiting rotations if they have a partner that they're trying to geographically increase their chances of matching in the same location. So that's another big consideration. In terms of if your medical school doesn't have a urology residency program, I know that it probably provokes a lot of additional anxiety for what is already a very stressful process. First of all, know that you're not alone. So in this survey from the most recent match cycle, only about 3/4 of applicants had a home program. So 25% of people did not have a home urology program. So don't feel like you're alone. So first of all, if within your home institution you don't have a home urology program, there's a good chance that you're not the first person who's pursuing urology from your home program. So you can ask your dean of your medical school, you can ask mentors and advisors within the Department of Surgery or people that you worked with during your clerkship. It might be that there is a local urology group that you could go and shadow and work with. Also, in this day and age where we're able to have so many virtual interactions, a lot of, you could say, affinity groups have very deliberately built mentorship programs. So for instance, the Society of Women in Urology have a very thoughtfully constructed mentorship program where they pair medical students with volunteered women who are members of SWU who say, I want to serve as a mentor to medical students. R. Frank Jones, Urology Unbound, Uriter, Michigan Urology Academy. So there are a lot of virtual opportunities as well to be able to connect with mentors who can be across the country from you. So It does take a little bit of extra effort to make that connection, but it's definitely out there.
Wonderful, and thank you for representing that data for us so that we all can kind of see these trends. So it's really important. We're in a lot of transition as we go through residency application processes. So be very, very familiar with the SAU website because that outlines timelines, expectations, and really I think is a source of truth for a lot of the match. Okay, well, student Dr. Rendon, we're very thrilled to have you here because we would actually like to ask what resources do you recommend for medical students that are trying to prepare for either home rotations or away rotations?
So this is a plug for joining the AUA, but the AUA has a med student section that goes over all like the urological topics and kind of entry-level information about all the different diagnoses that you should know. That's a good place to start. I will say that by the time you get to sub-Is, you may get asked questions that aren't necessarily on that. One of the things that I got from my mentor was the AUA guidelines, like hard copy of the book, but there's PDFs floating around. If you're at a home institution that has a urology program, your residents probably have that PDF copy or they have a copy of the guidelines themselves. It's helpful to kind of read through and have a sense of what to expect about things. No one's expecting you to know that book forwards and backwards, but it's nice to at least know and have seen names for things before. I also use, I think it's Whitman's, it's something like that, but it's a PDF file and it has really good, just basic information about urological procedures. And then lastly, residents. I think residents were the people I learned the most from during my sub-Is. They have a lot of great resources, but they've also had to learn this, like the information themselves. And so a lot of times they're able to explain it in a way that might be a little bit more attainable. Sometimes I felt like I asked attendings and although they were super knowledgeable and great, sometimes you feel like, oh, that was a lot of information, I don't know where to start. Sometimes the residents can kind of get you, your foot through the door and kind of let you know where to start looking up things. And then lastly, I know a lot of people use Anki. There is Anki decks for the AUA guidelines. There's a med student one, and then there's one that's just the regular guidelines. If you need that repetition and something that kind of keeps you on your toes and something to do while you're waiting between cases, there is an Anki deck that you can download, and it was honestly life-saving. I had questions that came straight out of this deck.
Okay, awesome. And a question for the audience. Can you hear everyone okay? Okay, excellent. Just want to make sure. So we're going to move on to our next topic, research. And I'm going to ask Dr. Yates to this question is how do programs evaluate research productivity?
Thank you. I think that is a no one-size-fits-all answer to that. I think every institution has a different set of how they consider students, what their values are, what their mission may be. Some institutions put a lot of value and a lot of kind of emphasis on research, high quality research, and not only volume, because you have to be very careful with volume. You don't want a bunch of abstracts without final products, but quality as well. So I think first of all, know thyself. Is it important to you to do research? You don't want to spend a lot of time churning out research that's meaningless to you and doing things that's meaningless just to check a box. And also know the institution and kind of where you're going to fall as far as your values, what you're looking for in a program. That being said, I do think it would be safe to say that almost every program wants to see that you are willing to do research, have done research. I think it tells the program a couple of things. First of all is that you're committed to urology because that is a significant amount of work. It shows that you're organized. It shows that you work well in a team. There's a lot of points about you as an applicant that the research shows follow through on a project, and that's why I say quality often much more important than quantity. I think a lot of students worry that they don't have the research in the correct field or the correct specialty. Some people may come to urology late and we're thrilled they found us, so we're not gonna, I don't think you should consider that a detractor. I think if you were committed to ENT and then you found urology late in your medical school, that is absolutely fine. Having research in the ENT field tells us that you have all of those characteristics that we're really looking for. Some programs do, though, want to see, they are looking to train somebody who is going to be an academician, who is going to do research. So, kind of take a look at the program, see what their values are. Do they align with yours? Does that?
Excellent.
Thank you.
And then Dr.
Clifton,
Kieran.
do you mind if I just add one
Yeah.
thing there? I just want to emphasize that as we look through the applications, the thing we're looking for is like somebody being able to take a product like all the way home, right? So following through is so key. So instead of stretching yourself too thin, find a mentor who's going to help you bring a project from an idea to an actual manuscript, and that really stands out. That would be my just little pitch
100%.
there.
We want closers. So if you have 20 different research endeavors and not one publication, unless it's basic science, that's probably not going to look too great. Excellent point. Yes.
I'm a faculty at Houston Methodist. Two things. I would emphasize quality over quantity. I know there is always this trend of, oh, I should publish 5 papers or 10 abstracts. It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. Do you know your research? Have you done enough research? Is there a story in your research? Means you did abstract and now you're working toward a paper. Do you have, if you have a paper, is it a first author or a second author paper, or are you somewhere in the middle? That's number one point. Number two is, if you don't have a research mentor at your institution, feel free to reach out to any faculty who does research in the country, because our goal is to help you, promote you. So please feel free to reach out to any faculty who's doing research. I think it should be driven by what you're passionate about, and then finding the faculty who is doing similar things and reaching out to that faculty.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushik, 100%. We want to help you succeed. Okay, Dr. Kieran, I discovered urology later in medical school. How can I publish efficiently in the field before I interview?
Okay, so full disclosure, Dr. Clifton gives me this question because I discovered neurology on approximately May 20th of my third year. I was like, I like general surgery, but these people don't seem nice as urologists. I was like, I love these people. Yeah, so how do you publish efficiently? So I think there's two things here. We're talking about publication. We're not talking about all of research. And I think that it is really important for research to find a good mentor to understand the project, to collect the data, analyze the data, to know kind of the start of the project, the hypothesis-driven part of it, etc. That takes time. Most research is not done in the weekend. So we're talking here about publishing. And I think you can start the process of doing research, but if you're looking for ways to put something on your CV, you're going to have to jump onto a project that has already been done, mostly but not completed, or you're going to have to find a project that can be done in a weekend. There are a few of these, but not a lot. So I'm going to talk really more about the former. As we said, it is really important to be the finisher. You have to be the closer. You have to see things through to the end. With that said, many people, for whatever reason, are not able to finish their projects. And so I think every attending who does research has a few projects that are kind of, just limping along to the finish line. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's somebody else, but we just need a medical student or someone to just help us with that. Ask people if they need help. Ask residents if they need help. Residents love help with research. And you don't have to be first author. You shouldn't probably be first author, but you can get your name on the paper, and you might not be able to initially do all of the work collecting and cleaning data, but you can get a really good idea of the project, speak about the project with some degree of knowledge, and help get the project over the finish line in terms of editing the manuscript. So I think, when we say research, you don't have to do everything. You should have a project over which you have some ownership, but you can have ownership over parts of a project, and I think later in the process, you have to kind of pick and choose what you can do. But do it well. If you say you're going to finish it, finish it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Dr. Traxel, how helpful is a research year prior to applying to the match?
So again, wanted to harken back to the results of the survey this year that went out to everyone who was applying in this year's match. And 19% said that they had done a research year prior to applying for the match, which I was impressed by that number, and yet unfortunately somehow not surprised. You know, talking with a lot of the medical students at my institution, not even those who are applying to urology, but just across the board, I think there is understandably this new palpable concern as traditional metrics have gone away for, in general, some really good reasons. You know, step one has gone pass fail. A lot of medical school coursework has gone to credit, no credit, or pass fail. Other distinctions like AUA has been done away with at many institutions. I know many people are looking for ways to try to set themselves apart. And I think that pursuing research is an avenue for some people. It's not necessarily for everyone. Again, I think that you need to have a hard conversation with your mentors to try to say, do you think I need to do this additional year of research? Now, many of those people who do that extra year, it may be because independently, they love research, they enjoy it, it's something that they're excited about and they're passionate about, and they want to do that. And so those people may not even necessarily be doing it because they feel like it's going to maximize their chances to match. Or I have worked with some medical students in the past who took that year to do research for very good personal reasons, where it made sense for them to kind of push pause for a little bit on their medical school experience in order to do a year of research. So all that to say, there's a lot of different reasons that people do a research year. Can it be helpful to make you stand apart within your application? Yes. That being said, it's not the only means by which to set yourself apart.
I can add a little perspective as a med student who did a research year. My reasons being personal. My parents wanted me back to Columbia after I graduated medical school, and I found the opportunity to do research at home. So I got to spend a year with them. But the advice that I got, I think the advice that I've passed down to people who've asked me, was a research year worth it, was along these lines. What is the reason that you want to do it besides I want to throw things on my CV? That's not going to really resonate in an interview room. Nobody asked me specifically about my research year, but they did ask me about the things that I did, and that research year was not just about my publications, it was about learning that I really liked doing academics, and that's something that I wanted to pursue. It was about learning that I liked mentoring other students. So if you're going to do a research year, make sure that one, you're doing it from a place that you know what you're going to do that year, you have something set up, something that's like works for you, and then have a good reason as to why you're doing it. What is it about yourself that you feel like you haven't gotten to discover in medical school that this year is going to provide for you? Because I think taking that approach when it comes to doing interview season, you have a good story to tell and something that people are going to connect with. Besides, well, I went to research and here are my like 10 publications, but I'm not very connected to any of them.
Wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Rendon. Okay, I'm gonna have three different follow-ups. I'm a very busy person. The question everyone's asking is, how do I get research done effectively? Number one, don't just come to your mentors. Come to your mentors saying, I'm an excellent writer. Do you have any projects that just need to be written up? Or if you love stats, do you have a data set that I can analyze and partner with another medical student that may want to write it? Know your strengths, and if you present your strength to your mentor, you will get on the project so much faster. If you just ask me, do you have anything? I'll be like, no, I'm too busy right now. But you say, hey, do you have something that just needs to be written up well? I love English. I'm thinking about one of my medical students right now who did that for me. It's amazing how fast you can get on it. That's number one. Number two, think about the journals you apply to. I am an associate editor of the Journal of Urology Open Plus. It's an open access journal from the AUA. You do have a fee to kind of pay. A lot of research mentors will have some money to pay for it. You're likely going to get your manuscript accepted. If you go to the Gold Journal or if you go to the Journal of Urology, that's a longer process and it's a higher rejection. So target your manuscript to publication if you're really trying to get a couple line items. I know that doesn't sound super, sexy, but that's actually how you get things done. Okay, so any other comments about research?
Just the last thing is, and just to emphasize your point, if you can identify a skill set that you have that brings something to the table, like stats, like slice or dice or something through Epic, right? Some skill set that can really set yourself apart, do that now, and that will pay dividends during your application and also as a resident.
Oh, great point. And it just reminded me, big data sets. TriNetX is an open kind of giant resource, and a lot of us have access to it. You can actually create a data set and analyze it really quickly. So if you get familiar with that, you also don't have to submit an IRB usually. It's usually IRB exempt, because if you're taking an IRB all the way through, that adds a lot of time depending on the institution. Great conversation. Everyone excited? Yes. Oh, we got a question in the third row. Again, it's so a large data set, TriNetX is the data set, and our medical student interest group at Hopkins actually takes all of the medical students and we bring them together and show them how to analyze the data set for their specialty. It's been a great way to get people interested in urology, but also train them how to look at large data sets. Okay, letters of recommendation. Let's start with Dr. Yates. How can I ensure I get a strong letter of recommendation?
Well, we were just commenting that we always come away from these sessions learning something from you about bringing the skill set and research. So I'm actually going to steal a line from one of your prior sessions here, and that's ask the letter writer if they can write a strong letter for you. And I had never really counseled any of our students on that before until Dr. Clifton had mentioned that in one of these sessions in years gone by. And I thought about that and I said, that is actually really genius advice, because you certainly can ask somebody for a letter of recommendation. It's a little awkward for a faculty member to say no, but if you give them kind of that opportunity and say, can you write me a strong letter? Then that lets them potentially, if they can't write you a strong letter, they don't know you well enough, they don't feel they could really highlight some of your strengths because they haven't seen your strengths. There's an opportunity for you to pursue a letter with someone else and thus avoid a potentially not stellar letter when you have a lot of traits that could be emphasized. So that would be my first stolen piece of advice, is ask the letter writer. Ask the residents on service, or ask the program director or the clerkship director, who typically at this institution, if this is an away rotation for you, who typically writes the letters. Because a lot of times there's an identified person, individuals who do that. I don't think it's unreasonable sometimes to ask for, there's a lot of different ways you can do this, a lot of ways to kind of slice and dice your letters of recommendation to fit what you need or want. A lot of times you'll go to an away rotation and ask for a letter, so then you have, depending on how many away rotations, you need to pick and choose how many letters you're going to have and how many you're going to submit. So think about that. Think about a combined letter. At my institution, we offer medical students to have a chair/program director. A lot of other institutions will do the same thing, so that you actually have a couple of letter writers included on that one letter. One other suggestion is when you ask for that letter of recommendation, there's two things I like to get from the medical student. You can do this proactively and then offer it. Number one, a vignette. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to do urology? Why do you want to do medicine? Just tell me about you as a human being, not just all of your credentials, which I can get out of your CV. Always include in there things that you are okay being publicly broadcast. You don't want anything that would be inappropriately shared in a letter of recommendation. So a short vignette, this is who I am, this is what I'm passionate about, whether it be medicine related or non-medicine related, what makes you a real person and an interesting person, and then your CV. So have those ready when you ask for that letter of recommendation.
Wonderful advice. Dr. Ziegelman, can I ask someone outside of urology to write my letter of rec?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, again, this is very situation dependent, and you have to think carefully about what you're trying to get out of that letter. So if you have a unique relationship with someone outside of urology and they can speak to character traits and an experience that will be meaningful. I've read letters from other specialties and been incredibly impressed, and they've really put that candidate over the top. And then I've read letters that you can tell they just didn't feel like they had identified a mentor within urology to get the recommended number of letters. So I think if you're going to do this, you want to make sure it's because you have a relationship with the person writing the letter who can speak to your character, speak to your commitment, within a specific attribute to yourself that you want to showcase.
What I would like to add to that, that's excellent advice, is there are other ways that information that someone may have about you that you don't necessarily want a dedicated letter because you have limited numbers of letters that you can submit. Quotations can be entered into your letter. For instance, program director / chair letter. At our institution, our medical students have a mentor that they're paired with a faculty mentor for the entire duration of medical school. What an incredible person to know this medical student better than I do if I have only met the medical student recently. So I always ask the faculty mentor to give me kind of a couple little bullet points, and then I pick and choose depending on, we don't want a huge letter, but a couple of bullet points that really highlight what that mentor who really knows that person, who's not a urologist, would like to convey about the applicant. And I think that can really help to kind of bring in a lot of different opinions without making you have so many letters. The only other downside of asking someone who's a non-urologist to write your letter is there's kind of, as we read, as institutions read your application, we know how other faculty members in urology write. We know kind of nuances. We're standardizing letters. There's a big push in the SAU to standardize letters to make it more equitable. So when you have somebody outside of urology writing letters, it's not a bad thing, it's a great thing, but there are some caveats that Dr. Ziegelman mentioned, and also that the standardization of the letter and the ability for other urologists to read that letter is somewhat limited.
Great addition.
So lectern 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how they go. Q&A.
Yeah, I got the Q&A.
What is TB?
Q&A.
What is TB?
I think that again, making
Talk
sure
about
that your
this.
letter is strong, and in particular that if you go outside of urology, you remember that the people who are reading them, as Dr. Yates said, they don't know your letter writers, and that can be both good and bad. But I think that you really want to ensure that your letter writers are highlighting skills that you have that are translatable to every field, so that you're collaborative. You are somebody who's inquisitive. You're someone who, gets things done, is enthusiastic, is, great to work with, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want them to highlight something about, I don't know, your ability for internal medicine, for example, because that may land wrong, but I think that as long as it's a broader picture of how you will add to the field of medicine, it's going to help. So I think just in addition to having a discussion about a strong letter of recommendation, if you go outside urology for your letters, making sure that your letter writers, can write the kind of letter that you want them to write. And I think being able to have that discussion is really important. And sometimes as a medical student, that can feel a little weird, but just have the conversation. It will be okay, I promise.
And student Dr. Rendon, who should I ask for a letter of recommendation?
So I think a good place to start at your home institution is someone that you've developed a relationship. You want someone who's going to be able to talk not just about who you are clinically, but also who you are as a human being, what aspects about your character are going to make you a resilient resident going into urology. And then I think one of the important things that I got was sometimes the letter recommendations are going to be coming from your sub-Is. And if you're going to do that, make sure you ask early on. I know it's hard because you're just starting out at a sub-I and you're trying to meet people and decide who's going to write. But I think the earlier that you're able to identify and talk to your residents are really good at letting you know who would be a good letter writer, and figure out who it is that you're going to ask, and ask early, and have your CV and your personal statement already drafted. It may not be the final version that you submit, but if you have those two things ready, you can hand them off at the beginning of your sub-I, and that person now knows, oh, I should be watching, if they're in a case with me, I can watch their skills. If they're with me on rounds, I can watch to see how they present, their thinking. So when you're on sub-Is, I would turn to your residents to figure out who is the best person on your sub-I to have a letter written from, and then at home, identify those mentors. And it may be from now, you might have someone that you did research with that has known you for a while. It may be someone that while you were on your home sub-I, you got to do a lot of work with, and they've got to see you a lot of time in the OR. That's a good person to have write your letter. But those are kind of where I would start.
Wonderful advice. And because I always have something to say, I think number one, you've got to manage up. So if you're going up to a faculty member, I can't tell you how much better my letter is if I know what they want me to write about. So if I say I'm going to be able to write you a strong letter, I actually have 10 questions that I give to any medical student, and I think some in the audience know this, and I ask them to fill it out because I ask them specifically, is there something in their application you want me to highlight? Is there something that you think there's a gap that I need to address? Did you ask someone else about research? research. You know, what are your goals? Tell me a little bit about something that's not in your application. So that's the first thing, manage up. Do the extra work, make it easy for your faculty, and know what people are going to potentially write about you. You don't want to like necessarily write the letter because you don't know the language. The second thing is outside letter writers, they use very different language. We are very effusive in urology. We talk about you being the best thing since sliced bread, and we use these really fancy terms, and that's a urology kind of thing that we do amongst ourselves. You go to general surgery, they're going to say this person worked hard and they cared. And that's true, but they just have different levels of enthusiasm. It's some weird thing that we do, but that's the way it's always been. So just be mindful of that. It's never going to be as effusive as a urologist probably. The other thing about the letter of recommendation that you kind of need to be aware of, there are standardized letters versus non-standardized letters. David Penson would probably kill me right now, but this is Vegas, so you're not going to tell him. I'm not a huge fan of standard letters because I think it disproportionately is helpful in programs that have a lot of students, but for me, if I have 3 great medical students that rotate in an area, I don't want to have to label them top third, middle third, or bottom third. They may be all exceptional. So I'm very, very concerned about standard letters of rec. I would say if you're going to a place, know if they do standardize letters of recommendation ahead of time, and if you want that to be part of it, because it's very metric driven, and sometimes, I will be honest, our medical student rotations don't have enough experience to appropriately give you the right metric. I'm just gonna say. So just know that ahead of time, because that will kind of maybe even dictate who you select to be your letter writers, because I don't. I do prose and I look for specific things and I write it down. Other groups do standardized, and you just need to know who you're asking and what they do. Okay, moving on to signals. Oh, there's a question, yes.
Would it be best to ask residents whether they do the standard?
Yes. Always ask the residents first. If they know so much, they know so many things that are going on. They know things that we don't even know that they know what's going on. So yes, ask them first, but to someone you trust, not someone who you've just met necessarily, and make sure you have a relationship where you can be honest with one another. Finding your resident that you can really have a relationship with is key. Not all residents are going to interact the same. You want to have kind of that commitment, like, I want to get better, I want to learn from you, you're one of my mentors as well, but can I ask you some questions? And then they're going to be more receptive. So not just anybody, someone that you trust, but I would do that first before going to a faculty. Faculty are very busy. We love you, but I cannot meet with every medical student that comes through my department. They want to, I just can't. So trying to kind of curate your questions before you go to your faculty also makes us very happy, because although there's no dumb questions, sometimes they're kind of dumb questions. So you may want to get that answer ahead of time, but great. Again, Vegas. One more question. Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
From a school that doesn't have a whole residency program, would it still be important to get a urologist recommendation?
Oh yes, a letter of recommendation. We just highlighted a lot of opportunities that are in the field of urology. You can form connections outside of your home institution. So maybe when we do our breakout tables, find a table to talk about that a little bit more. But absolutely, you can still get a letter of rec from a urologist. And even sometimes they're community urologists. I've had some wonderful, clinical, non-academic urologists write letters. You sometimes have to help them with like the sheet, but absolutely you can do that. And we have a lot of mechanisms to help support that, 100%. Okay, moving on to signals. I'm gonna start with Dr. Traxel, and we're gonna put 2 together. Are there any changes to the signal process this year, and how do I best utilize my signals?
So the short answer is no, we're not planning on any changes to the preference signaling system as it exists at present. So just so everyone knows, we just completed our second match cycle using a large volume of preference signals. So each applicant was allowed to use up to 30 preference signals. There's no tiering, so you might have heard of some other specialties like OBGYN where they have a gold level and a silver level. All 30 are equally weighted. You're not required to use 30 preference signals, but each applicant is allowed to use up to 30 preference signals. Additionally, once we moved from being small volume preference signals when it was only 5 per applicant, moving from that up to 30, we did also change the recommendations as to whether or not to apply those preference signals to your home program or to places where you had done visiting rotations. When it was a smaller volume, we told people, don't use up your preference signals, if you will, on your home or any visiting rotations. That unfortunately created an element of inequity because not everybody has a home program, not everyone can afford to do the same number of visiting rotations. And so what we advise now is use your 30 preference signals on programs that you are genuinely interested in. That could include your home program, might not, maybe you don't want to go to your home program, but use it on programs in which you are genuinely interested. I think the majority of students will use the majority of their preference signals on places where they truly want to go to and aspire to go to. But I do think many applicants will reserve a small number of their preference signals for quote-unquote safety programs, whatever that might mean. Again, that would be a conversation to have with your mentor as to how to distribute your preference signals. But we're not planning on changing it this year.
Thank you for that update. There were a lot of moving pieces for the past couple of years, so we do appreciate some stability. Feed that back to the SAU. Okay, next question is, what program will programs still consider my application if I do not signal? And what I'd actually like to do is go down the panel and answer, and I don't know that our medical student knows that, but I would like all of you to answer. I will say my program did still look at the applications, even if they did not signal, but there was a notable conversation about it. Dr. Kieran.
Yes, we will look at your application if you do not signal. With that said, I think when there are 30 signals and a program does not receive one of them, there is an implicit message that, you know, we're at least number 31 on your rank list. So we will look at it, but maybe not give it as high a priority, honestly.
Dr. Yates.
Same. We consider everybody's application, but I think there's two places where the signal is used by programs. Number one is trying to decide whether to offer interview. Number two is then trying to determine where to rank those who have interviewed. And I think the signal probably is very useful in both of those contexts. And I know Dr. Traxel has SAU data on how signals are used, so it's not something that's necessarily just theoretic, but they are used by programs very strongly. And also, I don't know if other programs consider this, but ARIS has a geographic signaling. So if New England, where I'm practicing, is a very small geographic area, not a huge number of programs. So if I notice that somebody signaled on ARIS that they wanted to go to New England, or whatever the capture is on ARIS, but New England area, and they did not signal us, that's an even stronger message to me that you want to come to this part of the country, but you really don't want to go to UMass. So I think that also comes into play a little bit for us. I don't know if that's true for every program.
Dr. Ziegelman.
Yeah, I would say in general, we review every application that comes in, but put preference on the preference signaling. Do you have a question about geographic signaling?
I do, so
okay, perfect. We'll hold off on that.
All right, so I do have some metrics that maybe will help with this. So last year's survey to program directors, because the one for this year's match cycle is still open and hasn't closed yet. So for the program director survey, I'm going to refer to last year. 50% of program directors admitted to using preference signals for initial screening, whereas only 10% said they use preference signals for formulating their rank list. So that would suggest that more use it on the front end, but once you have actually conducted that interview, at that point, then they're looking at that more in a vacuum and no longer necessarily considering the impact of your preference signal to their program. Additional metrics that would suggest there is significant impact associated with the preference signal. So looking at this year's match, the survey that went out to applicants said they received an average of 12.5 interviews from signaled programs and only 1.6 interviews from non-signaled programs. And 38% of applicants said they did not receive any interview invitations from a program that they did not signal. So obviously, those signals mean a lot to programs.
Thank you for that data. We really appreciate the sneak peek. And so we're going to just ask Dr. Ziegelman about the geographic signal really fast since he wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, I just think in general that this is, you should think carefully about this because urology is a competitive field, and if you want to be a urologist, unless there's a really strong reason otherwise, Hopefully you want to keep your basket open as far as where you'd like to train. And if you do signal geography, even if you've signaled a program that doesn't align with that geography, it doesn't mean that that's going to affect the ability to get an interview and ultimately match. But at least in our program, we do look at both the preference signals and the geography signals as we're thinking about offering interviews and ultimately ranking. And I'm presuming a lot of programs do the same.
And you have to remember, we don't know where you've signaled, right? So the geography, if it's really important that you're in one area, flagging it, for a partner, or that's where you have to live, can be very helpful. But a lot of programs, we're not always as interested in that. So it just kind of depends really on your specific needs. I really like those points. There was a question in the back really quickly.
I was just curious, does the geography signal come up in interviews? Like, hey, we noticed you signaled outside of our area, or why are you interested in coming here, kind of thing?
I think you need to assume that anything you put on your application is fair game. I've personally never asked that question, but I think that if you put it on ARIS application, it is something that they can ask you about, so you should be prepared to speak to it.
And there's no requirement that you have to indicate a geographic signal within your ERAS application, so you can leave that blank. Whenever program directors were asked anecdotally at the winter meeting, the impact of the geographic signal relative to preference signaling, everyone said hands down preference signaling within the urology match trumps geographic signaling every time.
Excellent.
I think
Okay,
the nuances of this can be really everybody has a different application package, so talk to your mentor. They'll know exactly what you need, what you want, and whether you should or should not use that geographic signal. None of us know for sure if it'll help you, but it's so nuanced and so individual. Ask your mentor, and I think they can help guide you.
Okay. And then moving on to some conversation about the match, I'm going to ask student Dr. Rendon, how do I learn more about specific programs?
Yeah, so I think a really good place to start is program directors, and the program spends a lot of time curating their websites, and you may have never looked at it, but there's really good information there about what to expect logistically. So I highly recommend looking at that, especially if there's certain things that benefits that you would like, or things that you're looking for from a program, or there's a certain specialty that you're really interested in learning more about. You can see how many faculty they have for each specialty and what their rotation sites look like. I think that's a good place to start. Also, I think being here at a conference is really helpful. You are meeting people from all over the country, who either residents, other med students who may be at those home programs, so don't undermine the ability of networking when you do go to conferences, especially as you gear for match season. This is a really good place to get some honest feedback about what the certain residencies look like, what to expect, meet residents from those places. So I think starting at the website, and then if you're able to go to a conference prior to the match season and getting some real-time information from people is a really good place to start.
I really love that advice. There's also, I think, a Google Doc that's still out there that talks about specific programs that I'm not supposed to know about, but I know about it, and the program directors do know about it. So just be mindful that people can see that document. The SAU has a great list. All of the programs that are participating in the match actually sign up. You can figure out who the coordinator and the program director are. We also have a lot of people are still doing virtual little experiences or open houses, so you can learn about the program. Understanding things are curated sometimes, so just be very mindful about that. Anyone else have anything else about the specific programs, how to find out more about them?
For those open houses, a lot of them are recorded, so you can go back and watch them if you're not able to, because I know I was in the middle of sub-Is and sometimes it's really hard, so just look out for the recordings. You can go back and watch them.
And you can 3 times the speed too.
Yeah.
That's right.
I was just going to say the Google Doc. I also have seen the Google Doc, and it is a great resource, but there are some things on there that are, sometimes other people's opinions. So I think, take any source that is not a primary source with a little bit of a grain of salt, because if somebody says, I don't know, I don't like Podunk State, Podunk State might actually be a great fit for you. But so just obviously, trust but verify.
And then Dr. Kieran, can you answer how many programs that someone should apply to, knowing that we have 30 signal preferences?
Yes. I think you need to be thoughtful about this. The number is a little bit different for everyone, but I think if you strategically sit down and you look at your programs, there's going to be a point at which you will say, I think I'm not going to be as happy if I match below here. Because you kind of, let's be honest, you're going to have a little bit of a rank list because you're going to signal already. And I think if you have this sort of list of where you will apply, then you have to, first of all, think about, are you really realistically going to go to somewhere that is geographically not somewhere you want to live? Or is it a program that maybe isn't a good fit for you, and the only reason you'd be applying there is to match in neurology? For some people, that's okay, but for some people, it's not. You have to be honest with yourself. I will say that when I see, this is my personal opinion, when I see that people have applied to 87 programs, I'm sort of like, oh, you were just there, like, oh, that's I could totally live there, sure. It doesn't seem as thoughtful. And so I would encourage you to just be honest with yourself, because you cannot go to 87 interviews. So where would you realistically want to interview, and curate it from that? So what would the numbers really look like? I applied to 40 programs. This was a long time ago. I think realistically 20 to 30 is probably more reasonable. But that said, I do understand that I also applied back in the day when you actually had to type your application. I paid someone to do this. But it isn't as easy to click. But don't kind of get caught up in clicking, and really try to be intentional and thoughtful about where you apply. Take mercy on your program directors who have to look at all of these applications also.
Dr. Traxel, do you have any good gossip for us from the SAU?
You know I do. All right, so we have looked at this very thoughtfully subsequent to the adoption of the preference signaling system, and especially as we transition from a small number of preference signals to a larger number. And I think actually I take consolation in the numbers that we do have. So this year, the average number of programs that an applicant applied to was 49. The year before, it was 67, and the year before that, it was 88. And so you can see the trend that people are applying to fewer and fewer programs. In spite of that, the average number of interview invitations that were extended to an applicant remained stable through all that. On average, people get about 14 interview invitations, and on average, they complete about 12 and a half interviews. That has remained stable, even though we're seeing this downtrend in the number of programs to which people are applying. And I think that should be reassuring information, both for applicants as well as for programs, because as was mentioned, there really was this glut and this bloat. I think some of it was as a consequence of COVID, when people just felt like they had to cast this wide net. And as a consequence, it was really overwhelming to programs, especially in the era of holistic application review, and you felt this tension where you couldn't give the appropriate amount of attention to each individual applicant, when you had to get through 400 applications. And so I think actually this trend is beneficial both to programs as well as to applicants, because it's expensive. The whole application process is expensive, but this is one piece of that puzzle in terms of the number of programs to which you apply. There's an expense associated with that.
So it is 11 o'clock. I'm going to have a vote. We have about 15 more minutes of really lively discussion because we actually got into some great detail. So option number one is we continue going through our questions. Option number two is that we go and we break out into the individual tables. So get your hands ready. Option number one, we continue. Who wants to do that? Raise your hand. Okay, option number two, let's do the mingle. Thank you all for being honest, but number one has it. So we're going to keep going with some of these questions, and I appreciate the honesty, but this is a really nice, lively discussion, and I just really appreciate the data that we've been able to bring today. Okay, so I'm going to ask Dr. Yates, how will step one pass-fail scoring affect my application or be considered? Dr. Yates.
Thank you. So I think this has actually had an opportunity to be fleshed out for a couple of years. So this isn't a new entity that we're dealing with. A few years ago, though, it was, and it was a big black box. So I think we now know a little bit more of the significance for you as applicants. And the intent of this, of course, was to improve our ability to perform holistic interview and holistic assessment of applicants. I think a question that people asked a few years ago, and the answer probably has panned out to be to some degree yes, is does that mean step 2 is now looked at as potentially a cutoff? And it's, I think that many programs will tell you that they do use cutoff of step 2. We'll see what happens when that also potentially becomes a non-usable metric. Other parts of your application also become more critical. So when the step 1 is not available to be used as a kind of a cut point for considering applications, research becomes more important. Your letters of recommendation, I think, have always been critical, and I see it as the most critical part of the application packet, much more than the than any of the other components. So in short, to answer the question, it did impact how we look at applications. Unfortunately, we lean on still some of the metrics that are not as, I guess, well lent to holistic interviewing, and you should consider the other aspects of your application to be very critical as far as letters recommendation research.
Dr. Traxel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to add a number to that. So it used to be back in the day when step 1 was an actual score, you were advised if you did well on step 1, don't take step 2 prior to submitting your application. You're only going to shoot yourself in the foot. Now that step 1 has gone past fail, and step 2, for better or for worse, has become a more important metric that some programs will consider. This last year, over 95% of applicants had completed step 2 and submitted a score. And so that's kind of become more of a default number now that people are submitting.
Okay, I'm going to ask Dr. Kieran, should I have a secondary plan? And what secondary plans are often pursued with students who don't match?
So I think you should always have a secondary plan because, you know, in surgery, you always have to have a secondary plan. So yes. So in terms of what secondary plans are often pursued, I think there are a few options. So one is doing a research year or taking time off to do something else. You know, people don't always do research. They may do a year of advocacy or something like that. And I think that's already been nicely addressed in terms of will that help you as the research year in general. But also recognize that when you find out about the match, being able to do research and bring it to some degree of completion by the time that you have the next application cycle, that is a limited amount of time. So you do want to be thoughtful, and if you are considering doing that, I would be very proactive about speaking with mentors about how this may strengthen your program, your application, and how to kind of best position yourself moving forward. The second option would be to do a transitional year. Some of the transitional years are tied to research where people can then be prioritized to jump into a urology residency. Some of the transitional years are general surgery. I think that's actually a great opportunity because that's a wonderful way to showcase your skills as a trainee, as a resident. Being an intern and being able to gain skills both clinically and technically is invaluable. And so I think that sometimes transitional years don't get a lot of love, but I think they probably should get more. And then the third option is pursuing something else entirely. And I think that you could certainly do that. Some people obviously apply to 2 specialties. Urology is an early match. You could theoretically apply to general surgery or emergency medicine or whatever. But if you really want to do urology, I obviously would not encourage that. I think that what's really critical with the secondary plan is you have to have a plan for yourself and kind of prioritize it. But also, if you don't match, and that is way down the road, why didn't you match? Sometimes it's bad luck. Sometimes it's a you factor. Sometimes it's a program factor. Sometimes you're a great applicant and there are great programs, but you guys are actually literally not a great match. It's sort of like going on a date. Like, they're wonderful, you're wonderful, you don't want to spend the rest of your life with them. And so just being honest about what you could do to strengthen your application. I don't want to say deficits, but what can you do to make yourself stronger next year, and then do that.
And don't we have a SOAP process now that's a little more formalized, Dr. Traxel?
So this year's match cycle was the first time that we call it the secondary match because it's not quite as codified as the more formalized SOAP process through the NRMP regular match. But what we did want to do was give people that opportunity where people are given notification, just like with the NRMP match now, several days before the final match results come out, people are told in advance, applicants are told you matched or you didn't match, and programs are told you filled your spots, you didn't fill your spots. And we have worked with ERAS then that if you are an applicant who didn't match, just that fast, you're able to turn around and make your application visible to the programs that still have open slots. This last year, all of the existing program slots were filled, but there were one new program, as well as programs that had just been granted a complement increase by the RRC that met like 2 weeks prior. And so they weren't able to advertise those spots in the initial match process. And so this was an opportunity then for these programs and these applicants to consider each other. And you can imagine a little bit of chaos in the process because it's a lot of all of a sudden, okay, this wasn't necessarily expected, but now I got to work through this, such that then ultimately all of those open slots were filled. Now, admittedly, with urology generally being a pretty competitive match, we're talking about single digit, just a handful of spots that are still left open, but those are still spots that are left open. And so we are planning on continuing the secondary match process. The overall feedback that we got was very positive from everyone who participated in the process. Additionally, the SAU is very thoughtful about how they construct their calendar. So we know that some of those individuals who don't match with urology are going to just that fast turn around and then pursue the NRMP match. Now, admittedly, you probably need to be all along the way having that as your backup plan because you have to submit the applications through ERAS and you have to hopefully have conducted some interviews with whatever your backup plan is. But in terms of actually then submitting a rank list through the NRMP match, the deadline for that rank list is following the match release dates for the urology match. So that way people have that opportunity. I think that it's actually very wise to have a backup plan. This last year, 15% of applicants said, yeah, I was also applying through the NRMP at the same time just to have a backup plan. You can do that, and nobody within urology has to know that. Actually, I'm not going to name names, but there was a former urology resident in my program who his number one priority was to be in my city because his wife was a lawyer who was going to be at this high-powered firm where she's now a partner. He's like, I got to be in St. Louis. I didn't know that he was applying to OBGYN at the exact same time that he was applying to urology. He matched with us, and I'm very grateful for it. He's a fantastic resident and now a fantastic endourologist out in practice. But I had no idea that he was doing this at the same time. So don't be afraid that by having this backup plan that somehow people are going to be aware of it and then they're going to second guess your commitment to urology. They have no idea.
Excellent. And I would just like to say, make it easy on your mentor and open up the lines of communication. They may not proactively reach out and say, hey, I don't think you're going to match this year, because that's a hard thing to do. But if you have someone you trust, go to them. And it's not always the PD. It may be a seasoned, experienced faculty member, but whoever is the most brutally honest is the person you want to have that conversation with, so that you can very, very thoughtfully still always have a backup plan, but maybe invest a little bit more in it. So Dr. Traxel, we're going to talk a little bit about interviews and your experience in the SAU. We know that the programs had both in-person and virtual interviews, and we were wondering if they're still going to be able to choose a format, and if you, based on the data that you saw any changes in the number of virtual or in-person potentially from any of the surveys that were done.
Yeah, so this last match cycle was the first time since COVID, since 2020, that programs had the opportunity to conduct in-person interviews. Previously, for I guess 4 years straight, it was mandated that all the programs had to conduct it virtually, whatever virtual format that might be. And there were a lot of people with a lot of strong opinions on both sides of whether to continue in person or whether to maintain only virtual. And truly asking both applicants as well as programs, it was an almost equal 50-50 split. And this was multiple years in a row conducting this survey. And we realized we're never going to get an answer if we're looking to those surveys. And looking at the AAMC guidelines, even though they laid out reasons for maintaining virtual or reasons to consider in person, ultimately within those guidelines, there was a statement that each individual program should look within essentially and determine for themselves how best do they share who they are as a program with the applicants. And so with that in mind, this year, we did allow programs to decide, are you going to conduct your interviews in person? Are you going to do them virtually? Or are you going to have a hybrid format? Which meant maybe some of their interviews would be in person, but other ones within the interview season might be virtual. And so looking at the information that we got from the applicants who went through the match process this year, the average applicant had about 12 and a half to 13 interviews, and it was almost equally split. Half of them were in person and half of them were virtual. I think the only real caveat is when we opened this up to the programs, in the interest of transparency, we told them, at the time that you are extending your interview invitation, you must let the applicant know, okay, I want to offer this date to you, and it's going to be in person, or I'm going to offer this date to you, and it's going to be virtual, because obviously, if you are looking at all of your opportunities and you have 2 consecutive dates of in-person interviews and they're on opposite sides of the country, that's going to be really challenging. Whereas if there are 2 consecutive dates, but one is in person and one is virtual, oh, that's a lot more feasible and a lot more doable for me. So we're going to keep it the same this year, where programs get to independently decide what format they want to have, but they have to be transparent in what that format will be at the time of extending the invitation.
Wonderful. And then Dr. Yates, how many in-person interviews should I accept? How many virtual interviews should I accept?
Well, I think this speaks to the importance of knowing your priorities, and you do not want to accept an invitation to go interview at a program where you really have no intent to ever go there. If you do a hard search inside of yourself and your motives and motivations, and you say, this is not somewhere that I want to end up, don't take the interview. You're holding yourself back, potentially another applicant from that spot, and it's not really going to add anything to your chances of match if you don't plan to rank that program. So I don't think there's a real, just like there's no true answer to how many should I apply to, there's no true answer to how many should I accept. But really take a look at your priorities and release those that you really don't have any interest in that program. I think it's a pretty straightforward but not straightforward answer.
Exactly. And student Dr. Rendon, I'd like to hear your perspective on how our students can best prepare for in-person interviews and virtual interviews, knowing that they're maybe going to have to do both.
Yeah, so I think first off, when you're starting to prepare for interviews, start with someone that you're comfortable with, but I highly recommend that at some point in your preparation, you do an interview with someone who doesn't know you very well. It's really tempting to do an interview with your mentor, but they know you. They can fill in the gaps of the questions, the answers that you're giving. It's nice to get a perspective from somebody who doesn't know anything about you or very little and can give you really honest feedback about how it is that you're presenting yourself. As far as looking for resources, I'm going to plug Med Twitter and like MedX. I think Urology does a really good job of having a really great presence through all their like groups that they have. Like Uriter has one that they do, like give a seminar with residents who talk about things to discuss during interviews. They gave out a full list of potential questions that they had residents compile into a Word document. I know that like Urology Unbound does things. So if you're able to get on X, I would, not even just for marketing yourself, but just to be able to look at what resources are available, especially as interview season starts. That's a really good place to get a sense of what questions you might be asked. I sound like a broken record, but ask your residents. They sit in on interviews. They hear answers from students who have gone through the process, and they're able to tell you like what are good things they've heard, mistakes they've heard, because they're going to remember the people who really stood out, and then they're going to remember people who perhaps didn't do as well on their interview. So they're a good resource to have. As far as preparing for virtual versus in-person, I think when you're making your list, and it was mentioned, when you're picking out your in-person interviews, make sure that when you're accepting on that day that kind of feels like a blur because you're getting invited throughout the entire day, is it feasible for me to be in one part of the country and then on this other part of the country and do so well? You don't want to be, let's say you're in Wisconsin one day and then you're in Miami the next day, but you don't get into Miami at 3 a.m. and so your interview's at 6 a.m. and you're tired and everything feels kind of fuzzy. So be intentional about where you're accepting, particularly when you're preparing for in-person interviews. They're really fun. They're really great to meet people and get a good sense of the program that you're going to, but it's also, you're being seen the entire time. It's not like on virtual where they're like, oh, we're gonna take a 10-minute break and you can go and like splash your face with water and like take a quick little power nap and then come back on the screen. You're constantly being visualized. So be intentional about where you're saying yes to so you can give yourself the best shot at those in-person interviews.
Dr. Siegelman, anything to add?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that you should rehearse your interviews, and we could talk for a long time about like how to interview, right? But everybody's got a different interview style. You're going to come across that during the season, but think about your experiences and how they might fall into common questions that people get asked on interviews. And asking your residents is a good way to learn about that, but behavioral questions, right? So what was a challenge that I went through in my life and how did I overcome that challenge? You're probably going to be asked that question several times in different ways. You shouldn't have a rehearsed answer, but it's nice to have thought about that before you get put on the spot, and then we get that blank stare. So that's just generally, whether it's virtual or in person, just think about how your experiences can be used to answer some of these questions that you'll get asked commonly.
I love that advice. Yes, Dr. Traxel.
And also bear in mind, these interviews are bi-directional. Most of the time you are given an opportunity to ask questions as well about the program. And always, if you are given the opportunity within an interview, always ask a question. So it might be you're at the end of the interview day, you've already spoken with, a dozen faculty members, a dozen residents. They gave some very sweeping presentation and you're like, I've got a pretty good idea of what this place is all about. And you're in that very last interview and somebody asks you, well, do you have any questions for me? Do not say, no, I think we're done here. Even if you have already had all your questions answered, ask a question. Be curious, because otherwise it doesn't sit well if you don't seem to have an interest in the program if you're not asking those questions.
Hey, a great resource. I interviewed to be a CMO before I got my CMO job. Don't use medicine questions. Ask like the top 10 questions in business. You will be amazed how you can adjust it and then have your standard questions. So you can have 30 questions on your list, running it down, and they can actually be really insightful, and it's not even related to medicine, but you flip it to the medicine side. If you just look for medical student questions for residency programs, you're not gonna get a lot of great questions. So think outside of the box. That's just a point. And then Dr. Traxel, changes to this year's application cycle, anything anticipated?
So we're not anticipating any big changes. So it's still going to be the same in terms of you need to get your preference signals submitted, and be mindful, you submit preference signals to the AUA. It is not through ERAS. So it's separate, and so every year there are people who don't realize this and they miss the deadline for submitting their preference signals. So put that on your calendar, make sure you've submitted that. And then the date when universal interview invitations will transpire is going to remain the same. It's essentially like the last Friday in October, about 4 weeks after the ERAS applications open up for review. So interview invitations go out on a Friday, and then no one is supposed to respond until the following Monday. That's when you're supposed to respond to those invitations as either yes, thank you very much, or no, thank you, or do you have a waitlist option for me? And then the subsequent day, that Tuesday, is appropriately named Flush Day. So after the initial wave of invitations have gone out, and programs then hear back from people as to whether they have filled all of their interview slots or not, then a second wave of interview invitations can go out. And so it might be then that you get in that second wave an invitation from a program that you really want to interview with, but it conflicts with the program that you have already accepted. You have an opportunity on that Tuesday to flush away the other interview. But once flush day is over, you are not supposed to subsequently decline any invitations that you have already accepted. I would say the one change for the timeline that we are anticipating this year is we are going to move up. It's not a full week, it's a few days. The deadline for submitting your rank list, it's going to be the very end of December rather than the first week of January. And that's by design because we wanted to, you could say, give more wiggle room for the process of the secondary match. So that has an appropriate amount of time in which to transpire. So again, the SAU website, once these deadlines and all of these dates are officially locked in, which they were decided at the board meeting Friday night, it's going to be posted on the SAU website. So on your own personal calendar, have these deadlines there with reminders to yourself. Because the last thing you would want is for to forget to submit your preference signals or forget to submit your rank list and miss the deadline.
Look at the SAU website. That's the moral of the story. Okay, it's time to mingle. Thank you so much for our panelists. We got some faculty. We are going to be at the tables. Everyone find their, oh, are we doing a raffle? Oh, we're doing a raffle. Okay, so while you guys, how many do I pull? Okay, we got a raffle, 1 ticket. Get your ticket. Everyone ready? Ticket. It's 515708. Who's got 515708? Come on. 515708. Going once? Going twice? Okay. Did we get one? No. Okay, we have to go to the next one then. Okay. 515632. 51. Oh, there we go. We got a winner. Awesome. Oh, look at that. That looks fancy. Thank you. I love it. I love it. Bose headphones. Thank you for coming. Join your table. Stick around. You can rotate. Don't come up here. Stay back there. And we're really excited to chat with you. Have your questions.